Hi everyone, I'm John, your host for today on Route to Scale, a short podcast featuring the founders and operators building the future of e commerce, fulfillment, mobility, and modern delivery. In this segment, we're going to be focusing on Africa, and today I'm very honored to have Chris, the founder and CEO of Kiri EV. Kiri EV is a Kenyan electric mobility company founded in 2020. Kiri develops electric two and three wheelers alongside batteries, charging technology, vehicle control systems, and connected fleet technology for the Kenyan and East African market. Kiri's vehicles uses removable lithium-ion batteries and connected technology. Its Kiri Go system includes vehicle location tracking, battery monitoring, anti-theft functionality, and an app through which riders can locate charging and swap infrastructure, as well as access vehicle information. They're on a deep mission to challenge the status quo of the motor industry across the African continent, one segment at a time. They aim to prove that electric vehicles can and will play a big role in the future of transportation. Thank you so much, Chris, for this time. I'm so excited for this call.
Pleasure to be here, John, and looking forward to it.
So, Chris, just to get us started, I have to ask, you know, before Kiri, I see that you've worked in a host of related sustainable industries such as renewable energy, solar, or whatnot. So tell me, what's your story? What led you to start Kiri EV?
So right after I graduated, found myself, working for a research company. Initially, I started off with an East African research analyst, but they quickly moved me to oil and gas. And then they moved me from oil and gas to renewable energy. So when they moved me to oil and gas, I got an interest in energy, and I was like, energy just drives the world. And then they moved me to renewable energy. I was like, wait, this is the future. So I started figuring out how I'm going to do this. So I actually started my company when I was actually working. So I got the domain name, I started registering the company. I
Wow.
wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do with it, but I knew I wanted to do energy. So I moved back to Kenya and I started renting out diesel generators for events. Because I was like, I want to be in energy, but this was like the entry point. But after a while, that didn't, it was great, but I didn't have a passion for it. So I decided, let me do renewable energy. So I tried to do backup solar systems, solar water heaters, and then we got a distributorship for Pico Hydro Systems from a company in New Zealand. So we installed a couple of those in Kenya, but you know Kenya's a very dry country, and with all the deforestation, we're getting even drier. So the market for that dried up quickly, literally. So I was left thinking, okay, what do I do? So I ended up parking the business for a little bit and moving into a different industry, which was aside another business that stores repossessed cars for financial institutions.
Wow.
So that business is not running for the last 9 years. But 6 years ago, I was like, you know what? I really have a passion for renewable energy. How do I get back into this? And I happened to go to an auto expo that was happening in Nairobi, and I met some Indian guys who had electric motorcycles. And I'm like, dude, this is it. And 2, 3 months later, I'd gone to India, gone to China, brought in the first products, and been figuring it out since then.
Wow. Wow. That's so awesome, right? That was in 2020. Electric motorcycles are actually very early, especially for I still feel that it's definitely up and coming in Kenya and Africa, but they still got a lot of those oil and gas vehicles, right? So how early were you, right? Tell us about your first experiences bringing, I mean, what I would probably imagine one of some of the first motor EVs into Kenya.
Yeah, we were pretty much, I'd say probably in the top 3 or 5, between 3 and 5 companies to bring in electric mobility products into Kenya. So we're definitely one of the first. And it was a totally new experience. There were all sorts of hurdles. First of all, regulation. When we brought in the bikes, there was no category to list them under, because all the government, all the registration was electric was petrol. So we actually had to register them as petrol motorcycles so that we can get number plates to be able to put them on the road.
Right.
Um, then the other was also, you go around and, most people, when they heard of electric vehicles, was either two thoughts. Either they think Tesla So really expensive, this is not for us. This is a niche market product. Or they think, the little toys you usually get in malls that kids, put your kids in and the electric toys. So try to explain to them, there's an electric motorcycle, this is how it works, and we want it to perform the same as a petrol one. It was a whole new learning experience, whole new, both for us and for the customers and basically every stakeholder involved.
Right. Wow, wow. So, you know, I'm as you mentioned, it seems like education to your stakeholders was really important, right? Um, so tell us, what was the defining factor that started to help you grow your business and sell electrical motorcycles? What's the thing that, your customers, what's the main reason why your customers would buy your electric motorcycles?
So, when we brought in the first products, they're pretty much off the shelf from India and China. What we did is, it was also during COVID. So COVID hit literally, I think 3, 4 months in just after we brought the bikes. So what happened is, no one was moving. A lot of companies were looking at, delivery started picking up. So we just hit out all these companies and they're like, "Hey, we'll give you a bike and you can test it for a month or two and just give us feedback. Give us free feedback. We'll give you the bike for free." Um, and so what the feedback we got was, we can actually see the cost savings, but the bikes are not quite at the performance level we need them to be for the jobs that we're doing. This basically meant we had to go back to the drawing board. So that was the first like kind of learning experience. Like, okay, the bikes are great. Well, there's a space for them, and there's a need for them, and now it's just getting the product up to spec. That was the first learning from the customer. The second was, when we were dealing with government was, okay, can we get tax breaks? Can we get a registration category for this? And, we're a small company, bootstrapping, you walk into a government office and they just look at you and like, what do you want? So how do we then go around lobbying the government to actually start looking at this sector as something that could potentially be a job creator, an industry that can grow? So of course that meant, banding together the initial early companies that were in the sector and kind of starting small association and how can we get government to listen to us. And then the other learning was basically, it wasn't just it was the need that we actually now, because we initially thought this was going to be an off-the-shelf, very similar to petrol. You bring a bike, you sell it, there's petrol stations everywhere. But we quickly learned, there's battery swapping, there's self-charging, there's limited range on these bikes. So how do we build an R&D product that is actually fit for this market? Yeah.
Wow, wow. So how do you do that? How did you go about that?
so, so that was the hardest thing. So initially what we did was like, okay, off the shelf products get as much testing as many different people from many different sectors to test it. So we got companies from courier companies to test it, security companies. We got motorcycle taxi riders, what we call borders here, to test it. We got testing from what did we test it? We tested with there's one company that was delivering tires. So they were putting massive truck tires on the back of the bike and seeing how they deliver them, to clients. So all of this feedback, gathered it all, got like understanding of what our clients were, the intersection of where all our clients' needs are. And then we fed this back to our suppliers, both in China and India. And then they'll give us a product, product improvements, and that came through on the next version. Still off the shelf, but working with a supplier. But what we quickly realized was, we're feeding information, all this hard-earned information back to a supplier, and then they're giving it to other competitors. And we're seeing new bikes, new competitors on the road with the improvements of our bike
Wow.
running around. So we're like, this is not going to work because we're working hard and everything we're doing is helping someone else.
Right.
So we decided, what we're going to do is we're gonna build it up from scratch. So we're like, okay, what's the most common bike on the road in Kenya, in East Africa, or across most African countries? And so we picked that model and we're like, can we, because we're not trying to reinvent the wheel in terms of the bike. A motorcycle has stayed the same, two wheels, a seat, and steering for the longest time. So we're redoing the electronics in it, because it's the motor, it's the battery, it's the controller, it's the display, and how all of those are put together that makes a bike. So what we did is we got a petrol bike, stripped it down, bought a whole bunch of components, and literally just started switching out. We got a 2 kilowatt motor, then we did a 4 kilowatt motor, then we did a 6 kilowatt motor, and all these combinations just to test what works. And what we did is we got our engineers to basically, so they rode the bike every day, and they'd put a 2 kilowatt motor, ride it for a week or two, and like, is this working? Yes, no. Then we switch it up for a different size motor, and we ride it for another 2 weeks. And this took about 18 months to do. And then we finally decided, okay, these are the specs we're going to use. Then we went and built a whole new bike based on that. And that's now what we have in the market.
So you actually manufacture and build your own bikes now?
So what we did was, like, we actually had built the first prototype here in Kenya, but it's really expensive. So
Right.
what we did is now we outsource the manufacturing to our partners in China. There are some components we do manufacture here locally in Kenya, and the idea is over time is to increase this. So right now what we do is we give our design to our partners, they manufacture for us, and then we ship it in and assemble here in Kenya.
Wow, I see. And that's actually cheaper than getting the China team to assemble it? Wow.
Yeah. So one, it's we can ship more units per container when we do the assembly here locally. And then because we are a registered assembler, we do get some tax breaks from the government for doing local assembly, job creation, all that kind of thing. So our goal is eventually to, incrementally bring production back, because it's not hard to manufacture a motorcycle. It's just the components and the I'd say the associated infrastructure and industry supporting industry just isn't there. So like,
I see.
Kenya doesn't have, we're in the very early stages of a steel industry. So to get the automotive grade steel required would still have to be imported. To get like the UV grade paint that's coated on the metal is still imported. So it's kind of like building up sector by sector. So the thing we do right now is you build our harness and you build some of the metal components here locally, because that steel is available. And then as we grow, is bring in more components that we can manufacture locally.
Okay, okay. Very, very interesting. So you mentioned that one of the most difficult things was obviously the charging stations, right? How do you go about, and currently I think I read your website, you have about 3 charging stations, right? But you want to increase it more, right? How do you actually choose where you place these charging stations, and how complicated is it to set up this infrastructure?
So we actually developed our own proprietary charging tech.
Wow,
So initially what we did, just for the ease of actually getting sales out and getting product out, because, we've been bootstrapping. So the idea was, we need revenue as early as possible. Otherwise we would survive. So we're like, let's sell the bike with the battery and a portable charger to the rider, so they can basically remove the battery, go into the house and charge it. But then what we started doing is getting feedback from the riders. Is like, okay, so where do you usually sit and wait for customers? Where do you usually park at night? Where do you, which spots do you usually visit? So we took all this data and then we started identifying, they go for lunch. This is where most of them live. So using that is kind of now identifying where do we put our charging points. So what we've looked at is we built two types of charging points. So we have one that can run on grid power. So you connect it to the grid, and then the riders pay per usage. So what it is a rider will come for the next 1 hour. So they
So Chris, we really have, one of the hardest parts of building out, EV infrastructure is figuring out the locations of charging stations or whatnot. And you yourself mentioned, it was hard on education and all this kinds of things, right? So how did you actually choose your initial charging locations? I hear you now have 3, I think, from my research, and looking to expand more. How did you make those difficult decisions?
So initially what we did is we were selling a bike with a battery and a portable charger, so our riders will be able to charge at home. And the reason we did this is because we were bootstrapping and we wanted to, get revenue in so that we're able to survive and, fight another day. But what we quickly did is we took all this data from our riders, because a lot of the bikes come with a GPS tracker and all of that. So we were able to see this is where they park during the day when they're waiting for customers. This is where they're riding to. These are the frequent points that intersect between different clients. This is where they park at night, or where they're domiciled. So taking all this data together, we kind of figure out, okay, these are the spots where we can put charge points. And what we did, we developed our own proprietary charge point, charging infrastructure, charging tech, and it's basically you pay per minute. So basically, a rider can go, like, when they're having lunch and there's a charging point there, they can pay. They know they're going to be here for an hour, and they pay for that hour. And then that once the hour is up, it stops charging the battery. And they do this using their own portable charger. So what we did now is that can run on main grid electricity, and then we also have a version that can run on solar power. So the solar power one, of course, entails a bit more capital expenditure. So you're looking at maybe up to about between 10 and 15K US to set up that kind of infrastructure up. But the good thing is, because it's run on solar, we're able to reduce the total cost of actually charging to lower than the cost from the grid power. And then what we've done is we haven't put any battery backup for nighttime, because at night we expect them to be home and charging at home. So what we've done now is we've tested the tech. We've done piloting for the solar charging infrastructure, and we've now showcased this. And we now towards the later on this year, we should be developing another 7 sites, and this is in partnership with one of the local county governments, because they've actually seen the use case for this and the potential for this. And what we've also done is we've made sure that our charging tech isn't just tied to Kiri. It's also agnostic and interoperable to any other manufacturer, as long as you have a portable charger.
Wow. Wow. Wonderful. Wonderful. Uh, one one interesting, you know, thing that I also hear is that, I also read up is your Kiwi Go system, right? Which essentially is a system that connects the bike, smart batteries, location tracking, and charging infrastructure as well. Which which data points or parameters from the bike led you to invest and build such a software architecture, right? Was it like the fact of safety or whatnot, or I'm just curious as to what led you to build
Yeah.
this operating system for yourself.
So this, first of all, was probably the has been and actually is the hardest thing that I'm building,
Mm,
because um, I come from I'd say I'm more of a hardware guy. I like, hardware. You can feel it, you can touch it, you can, play around with it. With software, it's kind of, I mean, you can see software, but kind of, it's not like one of those things that's in the cloud and it's not like as tangible as most things. So it's kind of difficult to monetize and see the value in it. But where we started understanding the value of it is, we were picking up data points like, we could track where the bike is. We have GPS data on like, where the bike is, location, speed of travel, how many times the rider is switching on, switching off. So how many times they stop and start, average journey times that they're doing. And then that's the telemetry from the bike. And then we're also getting data from the battery. So data from the battery was kind of like, what's the temperature of the battery? What's the charge level? So is it at 90%, 10%? And then we can also see when the rider plugs it in. So we can see at what times are they charging? Are they charging in the morning, in the evening? And how much are they charging? Are they charging the battery to full, or are they charging it halfway? Are they charging it for, so we could see all that kind of data. And from this, we can now kind of do, kind of predictive maintenance on the battery, where we can see like, you know, there's the cells in the battery are kind of out of balance. So we can call them up and tell them, look, we need to come in and rebalance your cells in the battery so that, you get optimized range and all of that. So picking all these data points, we now started getting, because a lot of the bikes in Kenya, about 90, I'd say 90+% are financed through financial institutions, so microfinance or banks. And they wanted this data. so that they can, one, be able to recover a bike in case someone starts paying,
Hmm.
and also kind of understand, what's the lifespan of a battery, what's the lifespan of a bike. And then quickly, insurance companies also started wanting this data because they also want to understand, how do I better insure this bike? Can I also take the data and see whether this person is a good rider and then maybe give them better insurance cover? So all of this is still early stages, but some of this data is being driven by like our partners, so the insurance companies, the banking, financial institutions. Some of it is from our own need to kind of improve the lifespan of the battery, because the more range you're getting and the longer the lifespan of the battery, the more the customer feels that they're getting, better value for their money. Putting it together into something that makes sense. I remember the first time we presented it to our clients, they had all this data and they're like, yeah, we don't need to see any of this. We just want to see the location, the distance, and the state of charge. So it's kind of, now we have this full data set. Some of it we use internally, and then others we kind of let the institution pick and choose what data they want to see. Now we feel the next layer on top of that is, can we add in kind of AI for better predictive maintenance, kind of better riding styles, and kind of also helping the client manage their bike better. Because with petrol bikes, it's pretty straightforward. You either you can hear when something goes wrong. If the engine have a problem, you hear a little ticking sound or not. But with a battery, it's very hard to see. So you need that telematics to tell you actually your battery's overheating, or the cells are out of balance, or
Hmm.
something's wrong, with something. Yeah.
Interesting, interesting. All right, interesting. So another you know, yeah, that's interesting. Would, like, I guess I'm just curious to see, would insurance companies and banks in Kenya actually pay you for such information, for such data points?
So right now it's a back and forth, because they don't want to pay for it because of course it's an expense. They want us to provide it as an add-on. So it's how do we then package it all into into a product that we add that increment, that cost of, because of course there's a cost of the actual GPS device. So there's a GPS device in the bike, there's a GPS device in the batteries as well, collect all this data. And then there's a cost of data associated with it, and then there's a cost of the dashboard. So how do we package this all together so that when we sell the bike, it's all bundled in there? Because a lot of companies will not pay specifically for that data. They want to access it, they want to use it, but then we have to bundle it. So basically what we do is, because most of, 90% of the bikes are bought on credit, you can add, you calculate that cost and we add it to the cost of the credit.
Mm.
And
Mm.
because what happens is, when someone does take a loan to buy a bike, you know, that loan has to come with insurance with it, just in case something happens to that person. So it comes with two types of insurance. It comes with the asset cover insurance, and it also comes with the um, medical cover insurance. So all of that then gets bundled into one, and then it's packed and then sold like that.
Got it, got it. So as you told us also, no, as I kind of researched about it as well, Kiri EV is also working a lot uh on solutions to also ensure that your customers can be financed, or to also also get credit to access these EVs. Is Kiri financing it themselves, or are you doing it through those banks and insurance companies, so to say?
So initially, we currently we're doing it through like the financing partners, because they have a deep understanding of the market, and they've been doing this for a long time. But one thing we've done is we've also looked at you know what's happening, especially with the major motorcycle manufacturers around the world, and this takes you back to especially India and that region, where we looked at companies that actually have their own in-house financing. And even if you look at major four-wheeler manufacturers in Europe, a lot of them have their own. in-house financing. So we are looking at building our own. We've actually started on that journey. We've financed about 5 bikes so far, and we're just collecting data, seeing what the repayments are like, and can we offer it at a more affordable price than the financial institutions are doing. And the reason we're doing this is we want to look at all the data we're collecting. Is there something we can pick up in terms of can we predict by this person's movement whether they are someone who's more likely to repay a loan? Can we see how much work they're doing? Because you can tell if someone's doing a lot of kilometers per day, then technically they should be, you're assuming that they're making some money. So can that correlate to a better repayment structure? So it's still in the early stages, but we want to build out our own financing arm as well.
Wow, wow, awesome. Now, you know, time flies when we're really having fun. So we're just down to our last few questions over here. Um, you know, one thing that we've we've seen is that EV policy has been moving quicker in Kenya as of late. To really change quite a bit, right? So you were here a little bit earlier on, and now things are starting to pick up, right? Maybe in terms of motorcycles, you've manufactured, right? Where are you at currently right now, and where do you want to be in the next 1 to 2 years? Where do you want to see your company continue to grow to?
Yeah. So right now we've deployed about 200 plus motorcycles into the market, and we've done it in stages. Our version one, our version two, we did version 2.2, and then version three. So it's every batch we've deployed, one has been larger than the previous one, but it's also been an improvement on the one before. And we've done this in I'd say one, obviously bootstrap, but two in a very slow and deliberate way, because we wanted to make sure that, because this is a hardware product, it takes time for feedback, get the feedback loop. You can put a product out there, but it might take 6 months before you start seeing that maybe this part isn't quite strong enough, the wear and tear on it, isn't great. So you have to do it in a structured way where you're able to improve on the next version. Now we've got to a point where we feel like the bike is really good. We've tested it across the country. And then what we've done, especially in the last 6 months, is really build up the partnerships to help us now really work with that scale. So some of these partnerships have been strengthening the financing partnerships we have. The other thing we've done is look at partnerships with third-party job providers, so
Mm-hmm.
companies, so the equivalent of Uber, Global, so that when we give a person a bike and they're getting financing, we can also offer them a place where they can get a job. So, we close the loop in terms of you can get a bike, you can get a job, and you can get financing, and you're able to repay. So we've strengthened those partnerships. And then what we're also looking at is also partnerships beyond Kenya. So, we've deliberately chosen companies that have presence beyond Kenya and beyond the East African region, so that when we strongly expand into, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, we're able to fully capitalize on those opportunities. But so what we're looking at next year is now maybe almost tripling the amount of bikes that we have on the road across Kenya and Uganda. Um, and then, looking into other new markets, and then also how much more production can we bring into Kenya? So it's kind of three things at once, and also just keeping an eye on how the landscape is changing, because we're getting a lot of competition coming in, especially from Indian and Chinese manufacturers. And also the legacy manufacturers are also kind of looking at producing their own electric motorcycle versions. So it's also looking at where is our niche and where do we fit in, and how do we protect our market share.
Right, right. Wow, wow. Awesome. Now, you know, one of the hardest things in business is always thinking about what is the most important constraints your business has, right? So if I were to ask you, what is the single most important constraint or problem you're working on now in your business that you want to solve that can't, that keeps you up awake at night?
Yeah. Um, So say down to one thing, sales, sales, sales. How can I reduce my inventory days? How can I get product in and out as quickly as possible? and how can I reduce, how can I refine my supply chain and distribution work. The idea is if I could get a bike manufactured into a customer's hands within 45 days or less, and even less days in my warehouse, it means that you increase my turnover, which means I increase my money, which means I'm able to go back to my finances and ask them for more money because I'm selling more, and this becomes now a continuous loop that's just growing and growing and growing. Because at the end of the day, um, if you're not selling, then you are slowly dying. That's what I've come to realize. Yeah, and then once you're selling, it's then figuring out, okay, how do we then make the margins better? Can we trim off a little bit here? Can we trim off a little bit there? How do we make the whole operation efficient so that our sales revenue doesn't disappear and we're just we're selling but we're making a loss? We need to be selling, making a profit, and then from there you just grow.
Right.
Yeah.
And how are you seeing, I mean, we can be really candid and transparent, right? How are you seeing the demand, so to say, for EVs, right? Is it that, how many are you producing, let's just say in 45 days, right? How many can you manufacture? And, how quickly then is that demand being taken up from your experience?
So we have capacity to do between 5 to 8 bikes per day in the current facility we're at.
Wow.
And the demand for EV bikes is actually there. What we've seen is, the market, customers have learned about EVs in two ways. One, from direct marketing from all the companies that are in the market, going and telling them, look, this is my bike, do you want to test it? And then the other learning is, the customers who actually bought the bikes have used them and then are telling other customers, look, this is, I've seen the benefits of EV. I'm saving X amount on petrol, on service and maintenance, um, and I want to switch EV because it's leaving more money in my pocket at the end of the day. What they are learning now is like, I've tested this brand, I've tested this brand, I've tested this brand, I prefer to go with this brand. So now that customers are getting to the point where they're able to identify what a good bike is. They have their own metrics on what and those metrics are completely different from what we thought the metrics would be. You go telling the rider that, oh no, this bike can do X amount of range or this and that, and they're like, no, I don't really care about that. I care about it. So that's one thing we've learned. So the market is definitely growing. There's a lot of room for expansion where maybe a lot of the players really haven't figured out the next phase of growth is growth outside tier one cities across Africa. So if you look at most of our competitors, they are in the capital city, they're in Nairobi, they're in Dar es Salaam, they're in Kampala, they're in Kigali. And the reason for that is basically, they most of them are doing a battery swapping network. And a battery swapping network really works well where you have gig economy workers because they're always on the move. They're coming in, they're doing Uber Eats, Global, whatever kind of delivery. And because of that movement, they always need to be able to do a quick swap, get back on the road. So this has left tier two, tier three, other towns, rural, peri-urban and rural areas kind of underserved when it comes to e-mobility. So what we did the opposite. We went and built our bike in rural areas because if it works in rural areas, it would definitely work in the cities. And then now we're coming back into the tier one areas, but we made sure that our bike can work in those areas and we can serve those customers according to how they want, because they're not doing the gig economy work. They're mostly sitting at the stages waiting for customers, maybe delivering fresh vegetables from the farm to the market. So that's what we're kind of looking at. How do we build a bike for those guys? And if it works for them, it will definitely work in the cities.
Wow. Wow. Wonderful. Time really flies. We're down to our last question, right? Well,
Yeah.
what we see is that, you know, uh, Africa and Kenya specifically, is really just booming in terms of innovation, young entrepreneurs hungry to reinvent their country for the future, especially in the mobility and logistics space, which we very much play a part in this ecosystem, right? Um, if you could give one piece of advice to an aspiring young entrepreneur, what would you give them and why? Who is looking to build in this space?
Um, so one thing I'd give is I'd say uh probably not don't give up. You know, whatever your idea is, um it's rather than don't give up and know when to quit. Because those are two different things. Knowing you've exhausted every possible opportunity, every possible angle is when now this is the right time to exit. Not giving up is do everything you can to get to that point where I've exhausted every angle, every business idea, every connection, every network. I've exhausted it all, and I've hit a brick wall, and this idea can't go any forward. And then from there, you pivot into something else. And what most people don't know is that when you get to that point where you've shut down your startup, because I've had startups that have shut down. You have such a huge network, such a huge wealth of knowledge, depth of knowledge, experience that very few people have, especially if you've exhausted yourself and really haven't given up and you've tried everything. And at that point, when you do your next startup, you'll be wiser, you have more connections, you'll know exactly what the investors want, what the customers want, and it cuts down the time to get to market, the time it gets to profitability, and the time it gets to success.
Wow. Wow. Wonderful. Well, everyone, that's it for us today on time. You know, thank you so much, Chris, for your time. Everyone who's listening into Route to Scale, this is Kiri EV that's looking, with a strong mission to transform the whole mobility landscape in Africa with their electrical vehicles and infrastructure. Thank you so much for your time, Chris.
Thanks, John. Pleasure to be here.